Today, we're going to be talking about everyone's favorite deck of all time. What's going on, guys? It's Cimoooooooo. Now, today I wanted to do a video discussing why Chainburn is such a viable deck right now. Now, I know I briefly touched upon this in my top 5 budget decks of March 2017, so if you want to check that out, go ahead and feel free. But this is going to be a more in-depth analysis and closer look at Chainburn and some of the unique attributes that it possesses and what makes it so viable in this current format. Now, for those of you who don't really know what Chainburn is, just as a really quick synopsis, it's a deck that runs about 25 to 30 trap cards that are focused solely on the win condition of burning your opponent's life points. They don't focus on attacking or anything like that. All the trap cards are just pretty much made to protect you from dying for the most part and just burning your opponent for 1,000,000 damage, and that's how the deck wins. Now, for a little bit of history, for those of you who don't know, way back in the day before the Synchro era, before the Zexal era, Chainburn actually used to be a very viable strategy because the game was so much slower than it is today. You know, there weren't these like crazy OTKs that came out of nowhere. You know, the closest thing we had to that was maybe like Magical Explosion FTK or something like that. But for the most part, you know, people actually had several turns to play before they had a lingering chance of death. And that's what made Chainburn so good, is because in a slow format, Chainburn has the chance to recoup its resources, as well as just, on top of the fact you're in a slow format, it already has so many good tools at its disposal to stall out the game that you could pretty much burn out your opponent completely. This was so prevalent that people were actually side decking 2 to 3 copies of Death's WOMBAT to counteract the deck in regional and YCS, or at that time I guess Shonen Jump level tournaments, because the deck actually had a very viable chance of showing up, and if you weren't prepared, you would just flat out fucking lose. Now, fast forward to 2017, and Chainburn is making a very big resurgence, and this is mainly in part to ZOODIAC really entering into the meta. Now, the reason I say this is because with your standard ZOODIAC combo, if you just open up with a RATPIER, you're gonna end on like a +3 in terms of card advantage at the very minimum, not counting anything else your deck does. And then if you start off with like a Speedroid Terratop, or you play the Coach Captain Bearman combo or any of that shenanigans, you're potentially looking at a +6 minimum, +5 or +6 for the end of your turn, which means that a card like Secret Barrel goes from doing a minimum of 1,000 damage to over 2,000 damage just on turn 1 alone, and it only goes up from there because the more turns that go by that Chainburn pretty much has, that's where Chainburn thrives the best. Your opponent's going to be drawing more and more cards that are ultimately dead because there's really no good cards against Chainburn for the most part, especially in game 1. Then that means that Secret Barrel is only just going to continue to increase in terms of its viability and its destructiveness. Now, the other reason that Chainburn is really good because of ZOODIAC's existence is because there's so many cards in Zoo variants that have basically 0 to no effect on the Chainburn strategy. I briefly touched on this in my video about my top 5 budget decks, and if you look at a deck list again, I'll showcase here, like a pure ZOODIAC build, there are so many cards that do absolutely nothing against Chainburn. There's cards like Dimensional Barrier that have no effect because the deck doesn't go into any Xyz plays. There's cards like Solemn Strike, which at the very best you might hit a max C, but even if you were to hit max C, you're paying 1,500 life points to do it, and that's going to bring the Chainburn player closer to their win condition, so that basically does absolutely nothing. You've got the hand traps like Maxi and Ghost Ogre, which don't do anything against Chainburn because they don't special summon, and they don't really play monsters that are going to activate effects, so those cards are basically ineffective. And board wipes, cards like Dark Hole, Regeki, those cards have little to no effect as well. Maybe Dark Hole because you can wipe out an OJAMA trio, but other than that, those cards are practically dead for the most part because the Chainburn player isn't going to be playing any monsters. And I could keep going on and on, but roughly about 40 to 50% of any Zoo variant-based deck is just flat out dead against Chainburn, which means that it's more cards that the player is going to acquire in their hand or set to their field, which means Secret Barrel's potency is just going to continue to rise and just continue to dish out more and more damage. Now, beyond that, Chainburn also boasts more draw power than it has ever had at its disposal ever. We have Card of Demise now, which is basically just a free +2 for the deck. That's at 3. You've got Pot of Duality at 3, which is just pretty much pick whatever card you want of the top 3 of your deck. It's not restricted by its special summoning stipulation because the deck doesn't special summon, so it just allows the Chainburn player to ultimately pick what's the best card that I need at this certain moment. Do I need something to burn you out quicker? Do I need something to protect myself? Anything like that. And then you also have 3 copies of Reckless Greed more often than not. You've got 2 to 3 copies of Accumulated Fortune. If you're feeling really ballsy, you could also play Pot of Desires to get that cheap +1 because you're not going to go through your whole deck, and just getting an additional burn card might be all you need to kill your opponent anyway. And then there's also to mention Balance of Judgment. You know, touching back on the fact that these ZOODIAC combos go from anywhere from +3 to +6, theoretically, in a Chainburn deck, you could just completely blow your load and just deal 6,000 damage in a turn, and then, you know, maybe protect yourself from dying that turn as well, and then use Balance of Judgment to just completely recuperate your resources because you won't have anything left. Balance of Judgment might be maybe 1 or 2 of your only card left in your control, and then your opponent has all these cards on their field, so you're gonna get to draw 3, 4, maybe even 5 cards off of Balance of Judgment. So, right, you know, just circling back, Chainburn has so much draw power at their disposal now that they never had before, and it's draw power that does so much for their win condition that it just pretty much puts them in such a powerful position to recuperate resources faster than they were ever able to in the past. Now, another good reason that Chainburn is very viable right now is that card like OJAMA Trio. You know, with ZOODIAC just doing its standard Trident, you know, Daigasso Emerald combo, you've got a card like OJAMA Trio to help control the board by clogging up the other 3 monster zones, so that means that any player can't go any further unless they kill their own monsters, like with Trident. They can't go further in summoning additional monsters, but that also makes Just Desserts just as powerful as well, because it just took Just Desserts from doing 1,000 damage up to 2,500 with basically little to no effort. And even if you do have the Dark Hole to clear off your OJAMA tokens, the tokens are going to burn you for 300 each, so that's totaling an additional 900. So even if you have Dark Hole, and Interrupted Kaiju Slumber is also a really good card as well, because it pretty much acts as another 3 copies of Dark Hole. But the thing is, if you summon out that Jizukiru after, you know, the Interrupted Kaiju Slumber resolves, the Chainburn player has Dimension Wall that they can take that Jizukiru and basically turn it back on you, dealing 3,300 damage directly to your life points. And when we're at a time where people are paying more and more for their life points to activate cards than ever, 3,300 can be fatal. Not to mention, too, there's also Lava Golem, which applies here as well. So if the Chainburn player is facing any problems from any problematic monsters on their board, they can just sack them for Lava Golem. Lava Golem's going to continuously burn their opponent for 1,000 damage. And then if they try to poke in for 3k, they've got the Dimension Wall to completely just end the game anyway. But going back to what I was saying about all of these cards now that people are using to pay to activate. You know, we've got 3 copies of Solemn Strike, we've got Solemn Warning, we've got My Body as a Shield, we have Instant Fusion, we've got like things like Lullaby of Obedience. Like, I could keep going on because there are so many different examples right now of cards that are just people are paying because they're using their life points as a secondary resource to be able to use these extremely powerful cards. And back in the day, cards like this didn't really exist. You know, we had Solemn Judgment, but other than Judgment, that was about it. So now that there's all these cards that have specific activation requirements that people are using just, you know, at will, if they use that Solemn Strike to, you know, negate Max C, or if they use that Instant Fusion to pay for that Norden, they're gonna just make the Chainburn player that much closer to their win condition. And this is at a time where we're at a time where we've never, you know, paid this many life points to use this many cards in a single deck. So again, it just plays into the advantage of the Chainburn player. So on top of all of these things I've said, this is arguably the best deck to go into time with, because any deck that's just very good at inflicting damage, if you're in game 3 and you go into time, you do not want to be facing down Chainburn in time, because more often than not, they're probably going to kill you because they have the resources to stall, like Waboku and Threatening Roar, and they have the resources to burn the living shit out of you that we've already covered. And ultimately, Chainburn doesn't really have any weaknesses, especially in the main deck, because other than an end phase Twin Twister, that's really about it. And you know, going into the side decks, people might have Royal Decree, they might have Denko Sekka, but if they don't, they're pretty much fucked if they don't get lucky and hope that the Chainburn player either runs out of resources or doesn't get the specific resources they need to either burn you out first or keep themselves alive. And the deck's worst matchup is probably DDD, because they can just make D'Arc and just sit on it and then they'll never die theoretically. But with everyone just playing Zoo variants now, DDD, even though it is at full power, people have kind of shifted away from it because ZOODIAC variants are just so much more powerful as a whole. But guys, that's kind of just my in-depth analysis as to why I feel Chainburn is such a viable deck right now. I may not personally enjoy the strategy, but that doesn't mean the strategy is not very effective and very capable of doing what it does best. So let me know down in the comments what you guys think. I'd really love to hear your thoughts on this. Thank you guys so much for watching the video. If you liked it, be sure to like the video as always. Subscribe to the channel for more amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content, and also be sure to back me on Patreon, because by pledging $1 a month, you're investing in my ability to continue bringing you amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. So thank you so much again, and we'll see you next time.